For most people, Days Gone is remembered as a story about survival. It's the story of Deacon St. John riding through the forests of Oregon, fighting freakers, searching for Sarah, and trying to hold on to the last pieces of his life that he once had. But after spending more time in the game's lore, I started to realize there's another story unfolding quietly in the background. It's told through the abandoned checkpoints, forgotten research stations, and dozens of audio recordings that many players collect without ever listening all the way through. That story belongs to Nero, the National Emergency Response Organization, and in many ways, it tells us just as much about the apocalypse as Deacon's journey ever could. The easiest mistake to make is assuming that Nero always knew what was happening. They arrive in armored vehicles, wear sealed hazmat suits, fly sophisticated helicopters, and they seem to possess information that no one else has. It's tempting to imagine them as an all-knowing organization hiding the truth from everyone else. But when you begin listening to the recordings in chronological order, instead of the order that the game presents them, a very different picture starts to emerge. Nero wasn't prepared for this any more than anyone else was. In fact, one of the reoccurring themes throughout the early recordings is uncertainty. The people speaking aren't calm masterminds executing a secret plan. They're emergency managers, medical personnel, and scientists trying to understand an event that is moving faster than their ability to respond. Every recording reveals another assumption that turns out to be wrong, or another plan that falls apart, or another piece of information that forces them to rethink what they thought they knew. Beginning of the outbreak, Nero behaves exactly as you would expect a modern disaster response agency to behave. Their job isn't to fight wars or conduct secret experiments. Their mission is to respond to national emergencies by coordinating evacuations, establishing checkpoints, screening the civilians, and directing refugees towards locations where they can receive food, shelter, and medical care. When the infection first appears, everyone, including Nero, simply treats it as another large-scale disaster that can still be managed. That mindset is reflected throughout the earliest recordings. There are evacuation notices directing civilians towards designated safe zones. Mobile medical units are deployed across Oregon. Checkpoints begin to appear along major highways where personnel attempt to identify infected individuals before they reach the refugee camps. Helicopters are still shuttling key personnel and injured civilians away from the collapsing cities. The entire system seems to be built on the single assumption: if people can be separated from the affected quickly enough, society can recover. Looking back, we know that assumption was wrong. But what's interesting is that the people making those decisions didn't know that yet. As the outbreak spreads, the first signs of trouble appear almost routine. One checkpoint reports more refugees than expected, another requests additional medical personnel, and helicopters begin diverting because refugee camps have already reached their capacity. Individually, none of these problems suggest civilization is collapsing. Together, however, they reveal a far more troubling reality. The emergency response is beginning to fall behind. One of the clearest examples comes when a helicopter crew receives word that the camp they were flying towards has already fallen before they can arrive. Information is no longer keeping pace with events, forcing responders to react to a version of reality that's already changed. In a crisis of this scale, that's often the first sign that the system itself is beginning to fail. Before long, those isolated problems begin feeding into another. Roadblocks become overwhelmed by frightened civilians, medical stations exhaust their supplies, evacuation routes grind to a halt, and overloaded freight trains carrying casualties begin delaying the movement of fuel, medicine, and emergency personnel. Transportation, the circulatory system of modern society, can no longer keep resources flowing where they're needed. Every successful evacuation creates another camp that must be supplied. Every new camp demands more personnel and equipment, and every solution generates an even larger problem than the one before it. The recordings grow even darker as conventional morgues reach capacity, forcing Nero to establish industrial corpse disposal sites, while simultaneously issuing orders for medical facilities to stop accepting additional refugees. These aren't decisions made because responders have stopped caring. They're the unavoidable consequences of a system that has reached its physical limits. Every truck delivering equipment to the disposal sites is one less transporting medical supplies. Every hospital bed is occupied, every refugee camp is overflowing, and every helicopter is already committed elsewhere. The recordings offer a sobering glimpse into the impossible choices facing emergency personnel who are no longer deciding how to save everyone, but simply trying to save as many as they can. The collapse accelerates with the loss of Camp 13D, where thousands of civilians perish alongside helicopters, medical equipment, and countless skilled professionals whose knowledge would have been essential to rebuilding society. Shortly afterwards, another report notes that 17 Nero checkpoints are overrun in less than 6 hours. That's more than a series of tactical defeats. It marks the simultaneous failure of an entire emergency response network. Modern disaster management depends on redundancy, with backup hospitals, alternative routes, and overlapping communication systems compensating when individual components fail. But once failures begin occurring faster than those backups can be established, the safety net disappears and the network begins to collapse under its own weight. Even the measures intended to slow the infection begin to undermine the rescue effort. Bridges are demolished to delay outbreaks, but those same crossings are needed to evacuate convoys, fuel deliveries, and medical personnel. Every defensive action comes at the cost of reduced mobility, illustrating how the systems designed to protect the civilians are now working against one another. That tragedy reaches its emotional peak at the Kamult Community College, where more than 7,000 refugees wait for helicopters that never arrive after Nero receives orders to withdraw. One official refuses to erase the records, insisting that someone, someday, deserves to know what happened. It's one of the most human moments in the game, reminding us that even in the middle of unimaginable loss, preserving the truth still matters. By this point, I think many players misunderstand Nero. The question isn't when they stopped trying to save people, it's when saving everyone became impossible. The recordings don't depict an organization abandoning its mission, they depict one confronting the brutal mathematics of finite resources. Someone has to decide where the last helicopter flies and which hospital receives the remaining fuel. Those choices aren't acts of cruelty, they're acts of desperation. By the end of the recordings, the infected are no longer outrunning individual checkpoints, they're outrunning the government's entire ability to respond. Transportation is broken down, communication is failing, supply chains have collapsed, and the people inside of Nero are beginning to realize that this isn't a temporary emergency. The world they've spent their careers trying to protect is gone, and what they're witnessing is no longer the collapse of civilization, but the emergence of a new one. Based on Nero's recordings, Nero wasn't responsible for creating the virus. That responsibility lies with Cloverdale Research, whose government-funded bioweapons programs led to the accidental release of the pathogen. Nero entered the picture only after the outbreak was already underway, responding to the role it has always been designed to fill, coordinating evacuations, establishing quarantine zones, managing refugee camps, and trying to contain what everyone initially believed was a conventional public health disaster. The recordings never portray an organization executing a hidden master plan. Instead, they reveal emergency responders, scientists, and medical personnel struggling to understand an event that was spreading faster than their ability to react. As the crisis escalated, Nero didn't fail because it caused the outbreak. It failed because it was attempting to solve a problem that no emergency management agency in history had ever been prepared to face. By the time they began to understand the true nature of the infection, the systems they depended upon to contain it were already collapsing around them. Nero wasn't the architect of the apocalypse. It was simply the first organization asked to stop something that had already grown beyond anyone's ability to control.